Hi everyone. At least here you see the circled area. That's the area of Manchuria that we are now focusing. Harbin, you can find the city there. So as you know, the Russian community, the community basically of the subjects of the Russian Empire formed in Harbin way before the revolution with the construction of the railroad. It was one of the it was the final stage of the Trans-Siberian Railroad construction, but in order to like save time and money, they decided not to go around China. But they went through Manchuria, and that's exactly why in Harbin, which was the city, which was kind of one of the central areas of the railroad construction. It just turned out to be so. The well, Russian colony, so to speak, Russian colony was established, but it was diverse from the very beginning. There were Russians, Georgians, Jews, a lot of Jews, because moving to there in the very end of the 19th century, uh, that was the way to escape the pogroms and a lot of restrictions. And there was no such a thing as pales of settlement. It wasn't even the Russian territory, it was China. So complete freedom and opportunities. It was the land of opportunities for the Jews, but not only Jews, not only Jews. And we will see that how within definitely just a couple of decades, from small fisherman's village, Harbin turned into one of the international centers of trade, commerce, and what not. Um, so again, wow, how interesting of me. I actually chose another photo from the internet, and it's all encircled for you so you can see that. So the red line, this is the oldest. Okay, let's put it like that. So you can see there are several colors, right? And there are the legend is there. You can see that it was all explained. Obviously, later on there would be constructed also other railroads that wouldn't have to go through Manchuria, but it was the quickest and it was the first. It was the first section of the railroad that kind of marked the end of the Trans-Siberian construction. But uh, but because of the stormy history of the 20th century, at some point in 1925, in fact, the Soviet Union had to completely give away that part of the railroad, and it all started to belong to China. I would like to remind you that there were two waves of immigration. Well, not two waves, like two directions. Those who stayed in the central part and in the western part of the country went to the south, to Novorossiysk, to Crimea, went by sea to Turkey and then to Europe. And those who stayed in the eastern part of the country, they would go to China because there was nowhere else to go. And the Red Army was very swift, and the Red Army was pushing and pushing the whites towards the east until there was nowhere to go but to the foreign state. And that's how a lot of immigrants eventually joined the Russian community in Harbin and contributed to that. There they lived, there the immigrants lived, I would say, pretty much the same life they lived before the revolution, and they managed to recreate the lifestyle approximately to the one they used to have, with just probably more freedoms, because definitely Jews didn't want to live the same way they lived under the Tsar, definitely. And so I would say they took the best from the imperial times and just invested in that. That's part of that retreat of the White Army towards the east is called the Great Siberian Ice March. So eventually, they ended up in Harbin, which is famous for its ice sculptures. I told you about these ice sculptures on the very first tour because I don't expect many of you to know what Harbin is like, but now you know. And I told you that you may have heard of Harbin thanks to its world famous ice sculptures festivals. And I told you that in fact the Chinese started, well, learned how to make ice sculptures when they were hired by the Russian community for the Epiphany, to build very special decorations for the Epiphany celebration. And this is how the tradition and how the tradition of making ice sculptures started. They are not, well, these are photos from the internet. I've never been to Harbin, so you kind of get the idea of how impressive this festival looks. And obviously now they don't really, well, it's not really publicly admitted that we learned from the Russians and stuff and stuff. Obviously, there's nothing religious now behind it. It just looks very impressive. But why I'm showing you this, because I was able to, while I was preparing, every tour is a research, and research is going through online libraries, reading through different papers that are available online, and well, finding photographs. So in one of the papers that I was reading is kind of a collection of letters, memoirs and letters. So this is the Singari, the river that across which the section of the railroad was built, and that's exactly on the Singari River that when the Epiphany would be celebrated. So this baptismal ceremony. This is the photo that I show that was, well, showed in that research paper. This is one of the sculptures that was designed by the Chinese for the Epiphany, and this is how like it was started. So what you can see here is the ice sculptures, right, like ice columns, quite intricately made, and there's something over there. There were a lot more photographs, but they were of such a poor quality that I just decided to include. And also, I found on YouTube, I found a video of Harbin. I'm not sure which year it was made, but I want you to see and to get a little bit of the vibe of the city, just extra to the photographs. And you can see the architecture. Architecture looks very much like, well, like a European town. Um, but not everywhere, obviously. This is not the downtown of Harbin, definitely. And it doesn't, it's just, you see photographs of the downtown and you see the rural area, which look quite different. But it's amazing that you actually have that. There are a lot of other videos, but of a much poorer quality that you can find online. So you see, it's a very eclectic architecture, very eclectic. You can clearly see some European buildings. You can see some a lot more modest buildings. You see people dressed but you see the Chinese, the kind of taxi drivers that look in one way, and you can see just some people dressed like Europeans as well. And that's how eclectic everything would be. When you see the downtown, you will see a lot of inscriptions in Russian, in French, well, in English. Um, Not everyone spoke Chinese, but in fact, I in a nutshell, all the subjects of the Russian Empire, when they came, it was obligatory for them to learn Chinese. So, well, at some point they started speaking Chinese. Well, you can see this is inscription in Russian. I'm not sure, something kras, something, I'm not sure what it's written, but it's something in Russian. And I believe this is 1920s, because I can see already the is it antennas? I'm not sure. It's really hard to tell. Was it street lamps? I don't know, but I see a lot of wires. So, and this definitely was colorized much later. So originally I also saw it in a black and white, very bad quality. So I think this one is way better. And again, some European looking building too. You can see people dressed very differently. Interesting, just interesting to see. it's quite vibrant. So it's just, I would say, very different from what you expect to see. It's very different, and to people, I guess they're looking at the camera. It's just amazing to see their faces, and it's somewhere in the other end of the world, and it's amazing to know that there lived a vibrant international community, and there was interaction, and I don't know what I, I just there's so many things I really want to know. So people are looking at the cameras and they see how shy people are, how well how weird they feel. Kids are so curious. So, but the downtown of Harbin, it's definitely the European architecture, and it's the I would say Russian way of life. But when I say Russian, it's just like the one in the Russian Empire. A lot of businesses. We spoke a lot about the Jewish businesses, which were really big businesses and small businesses. A lot of banks, and how Jewish communities, and not only Jewish communities, Russian communities managed to bring take Harbin to an international level. There was always a connection with the Jewish diaspora elsewhere in Europe, with the Russian communities, with Georgian communities. So Harbin was not really detached from the world. It wasn't isolated, yet it is definitely in the other end of the world to us, but it was not. And there is one interesting thing. So there were multiple. So we haven't really spoken much about politics. We spoke mostly about commerce, and well, also like the daily life of the people, but also there was politics. Obviously it was all quite politicized, and it's interesting how Harbin, after the revolution, turned into one of the venues for multiple political activities, including the Prometheism is the phenomenon that was were largely started by Józef Piłsudski in the 19th century, by the Polish. As you probably know, well, ever since the 18th century, big parts of Poland were under the Russian Empire. They were annexed by the Russian Empire, and there was always very strong resilience and opposition, always against the Romanovs. This never really ended, and in even after the collapse of the Russian Empire, at that point, Poland was not really part of the Soviet Union. It was before the Second World War, but yet they. So basically, it started before the revolution, but it continued up until the Second World War. So this idea of freeing, liberating all the minor nations from under the influence of the Russian Empire, and there was quite legitimized community of these Prometheists in China, and it they were not illegal, actually. Obviously, we spoke about the Georgian communities, we spoke about Georgian libraries, Georgian praying homes, and well, again, the connection with the Georgian communities, even the one in the States. So that was a big deal. So this is, for example, I was able to find some photos of the Georgian community house. That's it. I It's just written here, the Georgian Community Center. And these are the people who were in charge of the community. So this is M. Tsertsadze. He was the representative of the National Council in Harbin, 1941, 1942. But this had been way before. This was started actually before the revolution, but would thrive in the 1920s and further on. Or this is G. Hundadze. He also represented the not the council, but actually the entire colony, Georgian colony, as it was called. It wasn't exactly a separate settlement, right? So people lived all around the city, but they kind of called themselves colonies, but they were not the colonies in the full sense of the word. And well, obviously, Georgians were always very free, and they always wanted to get away from under the well, the influence and ownership of the Russian Empire. They wanted to break free from the very beginning. So quite quickly, before the revolution, this also anti-Russian committees would be established, and they at some point would even partner with the Prometheists, but well, they couldn't do much. And after the invasion, after the Bolshevik invasion in Georgia, they became even more active, and they kept in touch with the Georgian communities inside the Soviet Union. We know that from the letters that had been found. Well, obviously, the KGB kept a very close eye on such communications, but there was no one to control them in Harbin for some time. But starting from 1920s and in 19 well, and up until like early 1930s, in fact, the great number of the Soviet spies infiltrated in Harbin. So, and obviously they would hamper the activity of these clubs. So this is like even the committee in 1941, 1942. So these are the only photos I've been able to find, but these committees uh, had been established, as I said, way, way before. There are just no photos. But it's nice to see the faces of the people, regardless of the times. And obviously, we spoke about the cultural life, which was thriving. It was like really buzzing in Harbin. We know that it was a land of opportunities, not only for commerce, but also for people of art. And there was a very popular artist. He was an actor, a film actor, and also a dancer, Iliko Kazbek. I think Kazbek was his uh, just kind of an alias, because I think I also somewhere came across his well, his real name, but I wasn't able to verify. I wasn't sure if it's one of the same men, but nevertheless. So there was a it was a big duo. It was him and also a lady that also danced with him. So they were big stars, they were big celebrities, and there was a scandal. So they were involved in the activities. So they traveled. So Berta Chervina, so there is not much information about her, but looks like so they, while traveling, they went on tours to Europe as well. They participated in the exchange of information between the communities, um, which obviously had to be controlled and stopped and hampered by the Soviet spies that, as I said, had been quite everywhere in Harbin. We know faces of some of them, so I will be speaking about it. So Berta and Iliko Kazbek, they were top stars. They performed uh, across China. They went to Europe with their shows. So this is a concert, Цыганская Венгерка. So it's like a jeep Hungarian gypsies dancing and concert. That's so basically this is the idea. This is the announcement that I was able to find. And so she was a gypsy, as far as I understand, and he was Georgian. So one of the very I would say, avid fighters against the Soviet regime in China of Georgians, I would say, would be General Georgy Sidamanidze. I was able to find one photo of him. So he often traveled to China or to Paris. We know that the big Georgian community was established in China, in Paris, not far from Paris, where they purchased a residence and started living together as a community. This is where the political elite was formed. This is where the biggest part of the on top of the Georgian government, of the republic government that was taken over by the Bolsheviks, that's where they fled. And so we know that Georgi Sedemanidze was a very frequent visitor to France. So there was a lot of traveling. It didn't feel like the end of the world. This is very, very, very important to understand. Yeah, but for some reason, so he did not move to France. Some eventually would, but that would start much later, and we'll be talking about it. So I was even able to find this. Well, the photo of the one of the military words. I'm not sure. I don't know what it says. It just came with a photograph. Uh, um, well, some more photos of Harbin. Well, this doesn't even look like Harbin. So this is one of the stations of the railroad, and it looks like Tsarskoye Selo to me, or some Russian suburbs. Look how people are dressed. Look at the architecture. There were 19 Russian churches. Just imagine this. So it's just incredible, absolutely incredible. And Russians made up like 1/4 of the population. I mean, the subjects of the Russian Empire made at some point even half of the population. And then with the obviously, with you break it down, the well, Russians themselves would be the biggest population groups inhabiting Harbin. So this is, I think we saw, well, again, I believe this is 1920s or something, because of this, but I don't know. I wasn't able to find a lot of like dates, just photographs without actual dating. I'm not sure. So there you go. Everything is written in Russian here. So a lot of Russian businesses, a lot of them. And well, that's the pharmacy, for example. Obviously, there was also Jewish pharmacies. Just in terms of churches, I wanted to show you some of them. 19 churches, two synagogues, well, old one, and well, later on the new one would be constructed. Several praying homes, and then churches for Georgians. I haven't been able to find a photo actually. But so there was also the place where the Georgian community would go. But things started to change. So as I said, yes, there obviously would be also a lot of anti-Soviet groups, but well, we will be speaking about some of them later. But things started to change when the Japanese finally invaded Manchuria. They always wanted. It was always a very, very contested territory. So eventually they invaded in 1931. The Japanese troops invaded Manchuria. And we don't know much of the history. I'm not a specialist, so I'm not going into details of that. I was just able to find some photographs. And quite shortly after that, the Japanese created their own government. It's now referred to as the marionette government of the Manchukuo. This is how the kind of the the empire was called further on. So first it was kind of the state of Manchuria, and then in 1934 up until the Second World War it would be the Great Empire of Manchuria. So the previous mayor was taken down, and then they placed the one they wanted. They married him to a Japanese woman who definitely reported on him. So basically, it was the Japanese territory. And the Japanese didn't see, I would say, potential threat. Well, okay. Obviously, first and foremost, they needed to control the Chinese, but they saw that every Russian, regardless of their actually their background, they saw them as spies for the Soviet Union, because obviously Japan and Soviet Union would be enemies. Especially, well, closer to the Second World War times, things started to be quite heated up there. It's interesting with regards to Jews. One would think that since the Japan allied with Germany, and I'd rather just really skip the Q&A and finished a little bit earlier. I hope I will be able to do that. So one would think that there would be also Holocaust and the oppression of Jews, but actually that did not happen. It was quite the contrary. Unlike the other subjects of the Russian Empire, so Jews were, I would say, favored, so to speak. Kind of, the Japanese saw them as a great asset for the economy, for commerce, and also they so obviously, the Japanese knew what was going on in the world, in Europe, with regards to anti-Semitism and the Nazi narrative with regards to Jews and everything. But for them, it was quite the contrary, because so they saw just the good treatment of Jews as one of the assets, as one of the, I would say, the ways that, to manipulate the European position towards Japan. And so it was their policy to basically not to intervene and not to interfere with the activities of the Jews up until a certain point. But with regards to all the other subjects, all the other Russians, like generalized Russians, they were seen as spies, basically. And they started with the Russians, so they, little by little, all the Russian businesses would gradually understand that, things would be, but that things started at some point to go sour. It first started with the kind of the creative communities of writers clubs, theaters, and educational facilities. When there was a vibrant cultural life within Russian community as well. There was um, um, there was a big literary club, poetry club called Churaivka. So they started off in 19, actually even before the revolution, but after the revolution, there was, it just started flourishing. So Churaivka. I spoke about it briefly, and obviously the people who were members of this group, such as Alexei Achair, who was one of the founders, I spoke about him briefly, but I only spoke about the part of that before the revolution and before the Soviet invasion, before the Japanese invasion and before the Soviet invasion that would take place in 1945. So, but most of the members of the Churaivka, they were very much against the Soviet Union, and that's why on the one hand you kind of think that, who knows, but but the Japan also allied with the Nazis, so that was very difficult to navigate that communities for the Japanese. So they didn't really bother to try to understand that. So Achair, for example, eventually many of the members of this poetry club, they left before. They left in the late 1930s, but some stayed. And when the Bolsheviks invaded in 1945, I mean, the Russian army invaded, and the Soviet Union invaded in 1945, all these people would be placed into prison. And that's what happened with Achair, who was released and rehabilitated in the 60s. And he went to Novosibirsk, my town, and he taught in Novosibirsk till his death. I had no idea he lived in my town, no idea at all. Arseniy Nismelov was another poet who, unfortunately, joined the other club. There were also a lot of supporters of the Nazis because they saw the enemy of their enemy, their friend. And that was a big divide within Churaivka and actually within the Russian immigrants community. So Nismelov, for example, he used to fight in the army of Alexander Kolchak. and this was the core of the White Army. And one would think that how it was possible to eventually start supporting the Nazis and placing the so and exactly it was under the Kolchak that the Great Siberian March took place, and Nismelov was exactly what retreated exactly together with Kolchak, and that it seemed totally nonsense that such things could happen. I think I shared with you this poem, uh, and well, I think it's very powerful, and that's how this person felt. I'm not going to read all of it, just a little bit. So, and the tourist shall awake and wander to the Russian knoll with a dictionary he'll carry to read the words in stone. So I will enter, faint and weary, will at last burn out alone. So originally, it was well. Uh, very strong poetry of a person who was terribly homesick, and he was well glorifying the Russian community and well times before the revolution, and after that he and many other members of the Churaivka, they joined also the Nazi club. By the way, women were given just as much freedom as men, and there were a lot of women poets. So Lydia Khaindrava was one of the leading poets in general. She was member of the Churaivka club, and it didn't matter whether she was Russian or a Jew. So Churaivka was not particularly a Russian club. It was, I would say, international. Like they were Georgians, they were Jews, they were Russians, and Ukrainians. Obviously, there was also a Ukrainian colony. There was a Tajikistani colony there. There was a Polish colony. There were also well, there were. It was Harbin was a cosmopolitan city from the very beginning. I mean, ever since the construction of the railroad started. Levan Heindrava, her, I'm not sure. I'm actually the information is also quite. It differs. So, but yeah, they were related absolutely. So Levan Heindrava, he left memoirs of his life in Harbin. Quite a good memoirs. Again, it's about the life of the community. It's quite, I would say, poetic descriptions of his life, and he also left the his he tells about the life under the Japanese. So they eventually the Japanese they got it just got too complicated for them. So basically, they started prohibiting different political formations, different parties, and they left one pro-monarchist group and one Nazi group. So that was well, against that supported Hitler, and that was it. And they kept a very close eye on them. Um, and obviously they started to control and well apply much stricter immigration policy. Speaking of, so the members of these political groups, well, for example, there was Konstantin Radzaevsky was also one of the members of the Churaivka. So, but he um kind of it was kind of his hobby. Eventually he joined the Russian fascist party in Harbin, and he became secretary general. So ugh, that was it. And they were but as I said, there was, for example, Alexei Baksheev. He represented the group of the Cossacks. You know, Cossacks was the group of the people coming from the south of Russia. They had always been very pro-Tsarist, very. They were never, by the way, enslaved. They were free, but they were supporters of the regime. So they strongly believed that Hitler would save Russia from the Soviets, and they would be able to go back, and things would be just as they had been before that. Needless to say that after the war, when the Soviets invaded in 1945, he would be put into prison and he died in the camp. And this is his last photo. So Radzievsky was the same story. So Radzievsky never left. Alexander Yesinov, the same story. Um, he was one of the representatives of the Russian fascist party. Um, he was a military man. He was from a very I would say distinguished family with always a military career. His father served in the Imperial Army. It's like his father's father, and well, you know the story. So obviously, well, I would say quite the interesting thing that Yesinov, for a long time, represented the interest of the Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich Romanov in Harbin. Just to remind you that Kirill proclaimed himself the emperor in exile, and he became the head, and he was, well, he wasn't recognized by everyone, but in the 1920s, I would say maybe the vast majority of the Russian community and Russian aristocracy in exile recognized him as indeed the the next to rule um, when things would go back to normal. They never did, but nevertheless. So he had his representatives in the Russian communities across the world. So Yesinov was his representative in Harbin, and he also supported the fascists further on. What can I say? So this is Kirill Vladimirovich with the family. And Yesinov traveled quite a lot to France. Grigory Semyonov was a member of the All Russian Military Union, which we spoke about in one of the previous tours. So this All Military Russian Union had its headquarters. It originated in Belgrade in 1927. And then its headquarters moved to France, to Paris, and we spoke a lot about it with a lot of the scandals and a lot of this, well, spy stories and conspiracy theories all around this old military union of Russia. So, and Semyonov was one of the members of this all Russian military union, and he also supported Hitler. But it's, again, I will say it again and again, that did not mean they supported Holocaust. It's something they totally it was never spoken about. There was never seen any anti-Semitism. So these people were not, at least there was nothing that connected them to any sort of anti-Semitism or whatsoever. So in most cases, it did not really cover the anti-Semitic part. It was just this very simple narrative to whatever it took to defeat the Soviets. That's basically the, so that's, I'm not fencing out anyone. I mean, that was horrible and disgusting, but that's how things were. Most of these people clearly believe that they would be able to go back home and live a normal life in the normal Russia, the way they wanted, the way they saw it. So you have the idea. But yeah, obviously, of course, there were well, not with regards to China. I wasn't able to find any information, and so I don't know whether there was, but there wasn't. But in Paris, yes, there were a lot of this anti-Semitic Russians. That's true. But China was a different story from the very beginning. So, but since I did not find, I haven't found any information with regards to that. So we don't know. This is the photo of the so there was created this kind of the, so since there were two kind of not exactly the political parties, but some kind of movements that eventually would be allowed by the Japanese. And so this is photo of the officers of that nationalist movement. The yes, so that's their photo. Again, so further down, closer to the war, they started tightening the screws for the businesses, for different communities, and eventually, well, those people who did not really fit the two frameworks and the businessmen, they had to leave. But yeah, so these are the the interesting thing. This is the flag of the Romanovs, kind of the Romanov rule, double-headed eagle, and the Nazi flag. I find this absolutely surreal, but it is what it is. It took me a while to actually understand what's going on in this picture. Or this is a Russian, so this is a photo clearly taken somewhat at night. It says Russian club. It's written with the pre-revolutionary in the pre-revolutionary style, pre-revolutionary orthography. I'm not sure if you say that, probably not. Nevertheless, this Russian grammar, old pre-revolutionary grammar, and swastika. That's powerful. And yeah, from time to time I realize that I don't have a pointer, but you still have the idea. Okay, let's move on. So I hope I will not overrun and I'll be able to finish on time. There was released a monthly journal called Nation, Nazia. And here, I don't know, it's kind of a Samson. I'm not sure. At least someone maybe well, not a Samson, but probably Hercules trying to fight the the snake with the well the snake that represents communism with a hammer. It's kind of a modern version, modern interpretation of the mythology, but you kind of have the idea. Again, we are fighting the communism. We're not fighting Jews. Speaking of the spies, so up until let's say the arrival of the Japanese imperial regime, there were a lot of spies, and one of them we know for sure was Vasily Zarubin. So he was frequent. He was at some point also member of the Churaevka Poetry Club. There were a lot of spies there. Well, not a lot, but there were some. And he's one of those who, at least we know for sure, lived in Harbin for several years, also in Shanghai, and he eventually he left. He left and he went to the States. And for a while, he was there in charge of the mm, the committee that hired and trained and well onboarded the spies in the States. Just saying, at least we know at least we know him. We know his face, we know his name, but there were many others whom we don't know as well. So so these are the photos of the Soviet invasion in Harbin, 1945. Shortly after that, so this, well, this is interesting. Okay, let's go back over here. Wait a second. So it says here, "Да здравствует Красная Армия." So hail to the Red Army that came to liberate the people of China. It's all about the liberation, right? Always about the liberation. And immediately after the invasion or liberation, the Smersh forces came in. Smersh forces, it was the committee that dealt with actually you can, like, it was sort of the abbreviation that one can that basically stands for Смерть шпионам, death to spies. So needless to say that everyone who had not left under the Japanese, Russians, they were, well, and those who could not immigrate, which we will talk about later on. So let's say 90% of the Russian population that remained in China, well, they were all considered spies, anti-Soviets, and they paid for it. So they were placed to prisons, to camps. Many would not come back. Some would be released after Stalin's death, which happened in 1953. So they spent at least, well, 8 years in prison. Some little less. Obviously, it took Smersh some time, and we'll get back to Bologov. And whenever the Soviet army dealt with the liberation, alongside that, there was a lot of lootings, a lot of rapes. So the women tried to hide, and every night they would not be sleeping at homes. They would be sleeping on the roofs. They would be sleeping somewhere because, well, everyone was scared to death of the Smersh forces. But that's a different story. So when there are a lot of them. So, but in general, yes, you could find always a lot of this photo circulation of how the Chinese were very, very happy to be liberated by the Soviets, especially women. Yeah. Who is Grigory Bologov? Grigory Bologov was one of the lucky ones who, and also one of the heroes. He is the one who addressed the French concessions, the French who uh, who helped the Chinese population and the Russian population, the European population in China, and he addressed the French, and he begged them to save Russians from the Soviets. And so Grigory Bologov, he was very, very white. He was not the Nazi supporter, but that didn't matter. Everyone who had left Russia was a anti-Soviet supporter. So he managed to somehow make the French to transport 6,000 of Russians to the Philippines. I learned about not long ago that there was a Russian colony in the Philippines. There was an island that belonged to an aristocratic family in the Philippines, the Tubabao Island, that aristocratic family allowed to be given to Russians. And for each Russian, this person was paid a good sum of money. So multiplied by 6,000, you kind of get the idea. And this is the photo of Russian immigrants. That's interesting. So they were given a ship called Ilyich, named after Lenin. I don't know how it happened. I don't know, honestly. But they were fleeing the Soviets, and they got on the board of that ship and went and left for the Philippines. It was the wilderness. It was just the jungle and the palm trees. Well, this looks now like a proper resort, right? But back in the days, it was just absolute wilderness. Yeah, probably it looked very much similar to that, but there was nothing there. So this is the Russian community that came in. They had nothing. where they had really literally there was nothing, and they managed to build the settlement. They managed to build, they had hospitals, they had schools, they had theaters, and they had the community center. They even had the red square. So the first settlers eventually, so this is 1949, and so they're happy, they have just arrived to the Tubabao, and it's they don't look like the Filipinos, right? uh, they lived for about 3 years just in the tents before something more solid and permanent would be finished. By the way, the photos are provided, so wherever there is a caption, I always keep the caption. So these photos were provided and published by the Russian community of the Philippines. Just say there is a Russian community in the Philippines. Mind blowing, absolutely. So they started like building all sorts of, so they just started basically to developing absolutely wild island. Absolutely. This is the scouts bonfire and the gathering, and this was called the Red Square. This is the Red Square. I don't know what is written there. I'm trying to, no, I can't see what's written there. It's interesting. That's clearly in Russian, but I can't really see. Look how girls were dressed. They were dressed like the Russian girls from the Russian villages. Well, this is clearly well, this was meant to be. She's definitely posing, just showing a Russian girl. But this is Philippines. Just incredible, absolutely incredible. And you can see, so it all looks very, very makeshift. So this is the gathering in the camp. So they later on, as you see, they built even the church. So there is some wooden architecture. That's the church. But it took them a while. So for about 3 years, it was just living like that. And later on, starting from like 1951, 1953 and 4, uh, some people started leaving Tubabao because it was too difficult, because it was too much, and they started packing. So this is them packing to leave for the States. So after the Philippines, many would left for the States, would leave for the States. This is Kirill Bologov, the one who eventually, well, the mastermind behind the whole operation to save 6,000 Russians from China. And this is the patriarch Yonan Shanhaisky, that escaped from Shanghai. He was in charge of the Russian church in Shanghai, and well, he was in charge of the community, so he had quite a big parish, so 6,000 people eventually, but everyone left. By 1960s, all the people left, and there wouldn't be any Russians in the Philippines. But there is still this kind of Russian home, Russian community, so-called, in the Philippines, and that's the well, publication where I saw all these photographs. That's the Russian town in the Philippines, in the Tuabao Island. Russian kids next to the school. This is the Epiphany holiday, and this is the celebration of Epiphany. Some dancing party. You see, they leave their look at how they're dressed. They dressed just like ladies in Paris at that time, or in Moscow or elsewhere. And they were in the Philippines, in the Tubabao Island. And that's the workers of the hospital. They had a hospital. Look at all the workers of the hospital in the Philippines, in the Tubabao. I had no idea that. I only learned about it a few weeks ago. Um, So I find it absolutely mind blowing. Okay, this is it. And I'm not even overrunning. So now let's have a Q&A. If you have any questions, I just, it's, this is it. So basically after 1945, no Russians left uh, in, uh, in China. No Russians were left there. And so many were brought back to the Soviet Union and, well, they paid the really, uh, I would say, very high price for living in China. And by that time, many had left, but those who stayed, yes, they were placed in different. They were imprisoned, and eventually many just perished in the camps. And but those who survived, they would be released after Stalin's death, obviously, and rehabilitated. My father in the army in World War II spent time in the Philippines, but he never mentioned Russians. Well, it was only just 6,000, and they lived in the separate island, so they did not really go to the kind of the. I don't know much about the Philippines geography, so but I hardly doubt they kind of interacted a lot with other communities in the Philippines. It didn't look this way, but little do I know. Did you notice Alexei has Jew in his name? No. His last. Who, sorry, what? Sorry, I don't know what's going on, Dorley. I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about. I didn't notice anything at all. Most Jews eventually left way before the war, and they would go. Most would go to the States. There was a lot of support and connection with the American community, American Jewish community in Harbin, and most of them left before the Second World War started. So there were very very little Jews that stayed, and so in Harbin Chinese. Sorry, what? Robert, I don't understand. Were they friends? They were commercial partners. There a lot of Chinese worked for the Russians. They worked with for the Chinese. They did not really mingle much. There were some mixed marriages, but very little, because the Harbin was actually a small village, fisherman's village. So there was very little Chinese population, and there was, I would say, quite certain kind of population. But in Shanghai and bigger cities, like, well, it was different. So their situation was slightly different, and there were more mixed marriages. There was, but we know that a lot of Chinese worked, and they were not just the manual workers. There were also a lot of specialists, and we see it from the photographs. So I showed it last time. A photo you showed in black and white, a man called Alexei Jew. I don't know his last name. I don't know. I didn't notice that. Interesting. Okay, I need to have a look. That large swastika, was it made from? I don't know. But I guess it was all lit up. I think it was all just light bulbs. I think so. What happened to it? I don't know what happened to it, Martin. No idea. I guess it was smashed. Uh, when the war was over, I guess it was all smashed and destroyed by smashed by the Soviet troops. They wouldn't have tolerated that, definitely. I have no idea how they left. I assume they left eventually uh, by ships. I don't know. I didn't start. I haven't looked into it yet. So I don't know. His name is well written on the photo. Weird questions. I don't know what you're talking about, but I need to. I'll go back and see what you're talking about. I did not see any inscription of a Jew. Was it written in Hebrew? Was it written in Russian? How did you get it? Was he was a Jew? I don't understand, Orly. Really, puzzling questions, they for sure. Okay, or maybe it's just that I'm getting too tired and too sleepy. Um, Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Let me share with you once again the links. So, especially for those who joined a little later. So, in case you missed the recordings as of today, the two live walks in Jaffa, here they are. And the links for tomorrow, which is actually today for me. There you go. So, my website, you know the link, my YouTube channel where you will be able to find the recording. So for my sponsors who were not able to join us yesterday, Friday night, I will be sharing the recording shortly, and I will place it in our secret playlist, so to speak. And um, as for tomorrow, so those will be pre-recorded tours as usual. I'm hoping to find some time and schedule more tours for the upcoming week. And I'm hoping to go to Jerusalem and do some live streams there during the week. It will probably happen in the most inconvenient times for most of you as well, and for me as well, but I just don't really have any other time to do that. So we'll see how it's going to work. If it's going to work, I will keep you posted. Well, we'll see what tomorrow brings. We'll see. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your interest in my tours and very, very niche topics like that. And I will see you tomorrow. Thank you so much for your support as well. You can send me a PayPal donation. You can buy me coffees. Thank you for those who have supported me today for the previous tours. I will see you soon. Surreal stories, absolutely. Yes, thank you, Maria. We're having, yes, the large outcropping of fascism and Nazism. Oh, it's, yeah, well, yeah. But today's big, big, big protest in London gave me a glimpse of hope as well. It's just not that there are so many of those anti-Semites and fascists. It's just because they yell bloody murder. They're just too loud. And that's how they create this illusion of how many of them are. But maybe it's not really that much. So it's always the one who has least to say that yells and wants to be heard and everything. So we'll see. We'll see. Dolly, I have no idea what you're talking about. I will have a look. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye. Yeah, absolutely. So I know you agree because this is common sense, and what's been happening for these 2 years is not common sense. So, well, I hope the world will notice and Europe will see what's going on and what is happening actually. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon. Good night. Bye bye.